The letter had promised someone ordinary, but the woman stepping down from the dusty stagecoach was a ghost from a different world. She looked like she belonged in the finest parlors of Boston, not on my remote ranch where the closest neighbor was a hard 20-mile ride away. I watched from behind the wooden post of my porch, my calloused hands suddenly feeling too rough, my simple clothes too worn. Sawyer Briggs, they called me, a man who knew dirt and sweat, not silk and grace. She moved with a stillness that seemed impossible for someone who just survived 3 days of bone-jarring travel. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon light in a way that made my chest tighten, and when she turned to survey the modest buildings of my ranch, I saw a face so perfectly arranged it seemed crafted by an artist's careful hand. This couldn't be right. The correspondence had described a practical woman, a woman seeking a simple life, someone who understood hard work and wouldn't expect luxuries. But everything about this woman, this Iris Quaid, suggested she had never known a day without them. The dress she wore, though stained with the trail, was cut from fabric finer than anything sold in the nearby town. Her posture spoke of years spent in finishing schools, learning how a lady should carry herself. Even her gloves, now dusty from the journey, were clearly expensive. My stomach knotted. A terrible thought took root. What if she'd gotten on the wrong stagecoach? What if some wealthy gentleman in another territory was waiting for this vision of perfection, while I was left trying to explain the mistake to a woman who looked like she'd never made one in her life? The driver was already unloading her single trunk, a piece of luggage that looked far too elegant for my rough-hewn home. It was heavier than it should be, thudding to the ground with a solid final sound. But then Iris Quaid did something that made my breath catch in my throat. She pulled a folded letter from her small purse, glanced at it, then looked directly at the ranch house, directly at me. Our eyes met across the dusty yard, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, neither of us moved. And in her gaze I saw it, a contradiction to everything her appearance suggested. Behind those striking features was a flicker of something desperate, something that spoke of secrets and circumstances far more complicated than a simple mail-order arrangement. When she finally smiled, a small, tired thing, and began walking toward me, I realized one thing for sure. Whatever had brought this impossibly beautiful woman to my doorstep, it wasn't going to be the quiet, predictable life I had been preparing for. I forced my legs to move, each step across the dusty yard feeling like a betrayal of my own common sense. Up close, Iris Quaid was even more breathtaking. Her skin bore none of the weathered marks that came from a life outdoors. Her hands, when she removed a glove, were smooth in a way that spoke of a life spent far from physical work. When she spoke, her voice carried the refined accent of education and privilege. "Mr. Briggs, I presume?" She extended a hand, the movement practiced, easy, like she'd done it 1,000 times at 1,000 society balls. "I am Iris Quaid. I believe you've been expecting me." My throat felt as dry as desert sand. "Yes, ma'am. Though I have to say, your letters didn't quite, I gestured helplessly, unable to find words that wouldn't sound like an insult or a confession of my own inadequacy. "Didn't quite prepare you for my appearance," she finished, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I find that written words often fail to capture the full truth of a person. Don't you agree?" There was something in her tone, a hidden layer of meaning. I studied her face, searching for a clue. Any clue about what kind of woman travels 1,000 miles to marry a stranger. The longer I looked, the more I saw it. A deep, hidden desperation lurking just beneath her composed exterior, like a crack in otherwise flawless porcelain. "Your ranch is exactly as you described," Iris continued, her gaze sweeping over the modest wooden buildings. The simple corral where my horses grazed, the vegetable garden I tended myself. Peaceful, remote, far from the complications of civilized society. The way she emphasized that last phrase made my gut tighten with suspicion. Most women seeking mail-order marriages spoke of building a life together, of partnership and shared dreams. Iris Quaid spoke like someone on the run, like someone seeking a hiding place, not a home. "Ma'am, I have to ask," I began, my natural honesty overriding my awkwardness. "Are you certain you meant to come here? Because if there's been some mistake, If you were supposed to meet someone else, there has been no mistake. Her response was sharp, almost offensive, before she caught herself and softened her tone. Forgive me. The journey was taxing. I am exactly where I intended to be, Mr. Briggs. But as she spoke, her eyes darted briefly toward the horizon. A quick, nervous glance, as if checking to see whether anyone had followed her. The gesture was so fast I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching her so intently, trying to solve the puzzle she presented. The stagecoach driver finished with her trunk and approached us, eager to be on his way. That'll be everything, folks. Next stop ain't for another week, so you'd best be sure about your arrangements. He tipped his hat and climbed back onto his seat. As the stagecoach rolled away in a cloud of dust, Iris Quaid watched it disappear. And the look on her face wasn't relief. It was the look of someone watching their only escape route vanish. Whatever had brought her to this remote place, I was beginning to suspect her reasons had nothing to do with finding a husband, and everything to do with what or who she was running from. The silence that followed the stagecoach's departure was heavy, uncomfortable. I found myself acutely aware of every flaw in my world, from the patch on my work shirt to the weathered boards of my porch that desperately needed paint. Iris stood perfectly still, her composure so complete it seemed rehearsed, as if she had prepared for this exact moment 100 times in her mind. "Perhaps you could show me where I'll be staying," she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I assume you have made appropriate arrangements for a lady's privacy." "Yes, ma'am. I cleared out the back room of the house. It has its own entrance and a good strong lock." I hefted her trunk, surprised again by its weight. It was solid, dense. Whatever she had brought with her, it was more than just dresses and bonnets. "I've been sleeping in the barn since your letter confirmed you were coming." Something flickered across her features at the mention of the letter, too quick for me to interpret. "That was very considerate of you." As we walked toward the house, I noticed how carefully she stepped, avoiding the worst of the dust and debris that littered my yard. Her boots, though practical enough for travel, were clearly expensive leather that had never seen hard use. Everything about her screamed of a life of comfort and refinement, making her presence on my struggling ranch seem more impossible by the second. "Mr. Briggs," she said as we reached the porch steps, "I feel I should clarify something about our arrangement. While I appreciate your consideration in providing separate quarters, I hope you understand that I will need time to adjust. The transition from my previous circumstances has been rather sudden." Previous circumstances. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, hinting at a fire burning somewhere far away. I set down her trunk and turned to face her fully. "What kind of circumstances were you leaving behind, Miss Quaid?" For the first time since her arrival, her composure cracked. Just a little. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, to the high collar of her dress. I caught a glimpse of something hidden beneath it. A chain, maybe. The kind that make a woman reconsider everything she thought she knew about her life, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The kind that make even the most unlikely choices seem reasonable by comparison. Before I could respond, a new sound echoed across the valley. Horses, the sound of approaching riders. 3 of them. Cresting the ridge that marked the edge of my property, their silhouettes dark against the afternoon sky. Iris went rigid, her face drained of color, transforming her from a mystery into someone genuinely, deeply afraid. "Are you expecting visitors?" she asked, but her tone told me she already knew the answer. And it was the one she'd been dreading. "No, ma'am," and I said, my own senses on high alert. "Out here, unexpected visitors usually mean trouble." Her hand gripped my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. "Mr. Briggs, Sawyer, I need you to understand something. Whatever those men might say about me, whatever claims they might make, I am who I told you I was in my letters. A woman looking for a new life." She paused, her eyes pleading. "But there are people who would prefer to remember me differently." The riders were close enough now that I could make out details. Well-dressed men on good horses, the kind who could afford to travel far from civilization when they had business to conduct. The kind who didn't come calling on isolated ranches unless they were looking for something specific or someone. "Just how much trouble," I asked, my voice low, "did you bring to my doorstep, Miss Quaid?" The three riders approached with the measured pace of men who knew their quarry had nowhere to run. Iris's grip on my arm tightened, and I could feel the tremor in her fingers, a stark contrast to her forced composure. The lead rider was a tall man with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone used to giving orders. His companions flanked him with the easy confidence of hired muscle. "Miss Petton," the silver-haired man called out as he reined in his horse 20 feet from the porch. His voice was smooth but carried an edge of steel. "Or should I say, the future Mrs. Hartford? You've led us quite a chase." I felt Iris stiffen beside me at the name. Petton, not Quaid. Her carefully constructed identity cracked like ice in a spring thaw. Everything she had told me, every word and every letter we had exchanged, had been built on a foundation of lies. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, gentlemen," Iris replied, her voice surprisingly steady, though I could feel the fear radiating from her. "My name is Iris Quaid, and I am here to marry Mr. Briggs." The lead rider dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who spent his life in the saddle. "Miss Victoria Petton, your father has been very worried about you. Running away 3 days before your wedding to Charles Hartford was most inconsiderate." Victoria. Even her first name had been false. A cold knot formed in my stomach as the pieces began to fall into place. A wealthy woman, a high society runaway fleeing an arranged marriage. She'd used a mail-order bride arrangement as a clever cover for her escape. I hadn't been a partner in a new life. I had been nothing more than a convenient fiction, a place to disappear, a fool. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding here," I said, stepping slightly forward, placing myself between her and the mounted men. "This lady came here of her own free will to honor an agreement we made." The silver-haired man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Briggs, is it? I'm afraid you've been the victim of an elaborate deception. Miss Petton is engaged to be married to the son of one of the most prominent families in St. Louis. Her father has authorized me to bring her home, to fulfill her obligations." "And if she refuses?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Then we'll be forced to involve the local authorities," he said smoothly. "You see, when Miss Petton fled, she took with her certain family heirlooms, valuable items that do not belong to her. That makes this a matter for the law." Her hand moved instinctively to her throat again, confirming what I'd suspected. Whatever she wore beneath that high collar was worth enough to bring 3 armed men hundreds of miles into the wilderness to retrieve it. "Mr. Briggs," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of genuine desperation for the first time, "I know I've deceived you, but if you have any kindness in your heart, please, don't let them take me back." The silver-haired man's patience was clearly wearing thin. "We can do this the easy way, or the hard way, Miss Petton, but make no mistake, you are coming back with us." I looked at the woman beside me, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not the mysterious Iris Quaid who had captured my imagination, but a frightened young woman named Victoria, caught between two impossible choices. Whatever she had done, whatever she had taken, she had risked everything to escape a life she couldn't bear. My mind raced. 3 armed men against one rancher and a terrified woman were poor odds. But something in her voice, the raw desperation beneath her lies, stirred a protective instinct in me that overrode common sense. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property," I said, my voice carrying more confidence than I felt. "Miss Quaid came here freely. She's free to stay or go as she chooses." The silver-haired man's expression hardened. "Mr. Briggs, you're making a serious mistake. This woman is a thief and a fugitive from her lawful obligations. Harboring her makes you an accessory to her crimes." "What crime?" I demanded. "Running away from a marriage she didn't want? Last I checked, that wasn't against the law." One of the mounted men moved his hand, letting it rest near the revolver on his hip. The gesture was casual, but unmistakable. I kept my own hands visible and steady, knowing any sudden movement could turn this deadly. "The jewelry she stole belongs to the Hartford family," the leader continued, his eyes cold. "A necklace worth more than your ranch and everything on it. Return it now, and we might be willing to overlook your involvement." Victoria stepped closer to me, so close I could feel the warmth of her body against my arm. Despite the lies, I found myself oddly comforted by her presence. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper, meant only for me. "It was my mother's necklace," she breathed. "Charles Hartford's father demanded it as part of the marriage contract. It's the only thing I have left of her." The silver-haired man's patience finally snapped. "Miss Peaton, you have exactly 1 minute to retrieve that necklace and come with us voluntarily. After that, we will take whatever measures are necessary." I felt Victoria trembling beside me, her earlier composure completely shattered. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Maybe it was the way she had asked for help, or maybe it was my own stubborn refusal to be bullied on my own land. Either way, I stepped fully in front of her, shielding her from the three men. "The lady stays here," I said firmly. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me first." The leader's hand moved to his own weapon. "That can be arranged, Mr. Briggs." But before anyone could draw, Victoria stepped out from behind me. With trembling fingers, she reached beneath her collar. She withdrew a necklace that caught the afternoon light like captured fire. Even from a distance, I could see it was extraordinary, a cascade of diamonds and emeralds that spoke of generations of wealth and history. "This is what you came for," she said, holding it up for all of us to see. Her voice was shaking, but growing stronger. "But understand this. My mother wore this necklace on her wedding day, and her mother before her. It represents love freely given, not a prize to be sold like cattle at market." The silver-haired man's eyes fixed on the jewelry, his expression a mixture of greed and satisfaction. "Miss Peaton, you're being overly dramatic. Marriage is a business arrangement. Love is a luxury few can afford." "Then perhaps," Victoria said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, "it's time I learned to live without luxury." And before anyone could react, she drew her arm back and hurled the necklace. It sailed through the air in a glittering arc, disappearing into the dense, thorny scrub brush beyond the corral. It vanished without a sound, leaving four men staring in stunned shock at the spot where a fortune had just been swallowed by the wilderness. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whistling through the scrub. The silver-haired man's face transformed from smug confidence to raw fury. His carefully maintained composure cracked like a dam under pressure. "You foolish girl," he snarled, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? That necklace was worth more than most men see in a lifetime." "I know exactly what I've done," Victoria replied, her voice steady now, filled with the conviction of someone who had finally seized control of her own fate. "I've made it impossible for you to use my mother's memory as currency in your business arrangements." I watched her, a growing sense of admiration washing away my earlier feelings of betrayal. Whatever her real name was, whatever lies she had told, she had just sacrificed a fortune on principle. The principle of not being bought and sold. The two mounted men were already scanning the area, their faces grim as they calculated how long it would take to search acres of dense, thorny brush. "You'll spend the rest of your days searching that scrub," I said quietly, pressing the advantage. "Maybe longer, and you'll be doing it as trespassers on my land." The leader's hand hovered near his weapon, his anger making him reckless. "Mr. Briggs, you've involved yourself in something that is none of your concern. Miss Peaton has obligations that extend far beyond her personal preferences." "Maybe so," I replied, my own hand moving casually to rest on the stock of the rifle leaning against the porch post. "But right now she's under my protection, and I don't take kindly to armed men threatening women on my property." The standoff stretched, taut as a wire. Four people frozen in a moment that could explode into violence at the slightest twitch. Then one of the mounted men spoke for the first time, his voice practical and weary. "Boss, that brush stretches for miles. Could take us weeks to search it proper. And there's no guarantee we'd find anything smaller than a saddle." He shook his head. "Maybe we should consider our options." The silver-haired man's jaw worked silently as he weighed his choices. He had lost. The prize was gone, likely for good. Finally, he stepped back toward his horse, his movements stiff with barely controlled rage. "Miss Peaton," he said, his voice cold as winter steel, "your father will be most disappointed to learn of your decision, as will Mr. Hartford. They both have long memories and considerable influence. Then they'll have to learn to live with disappointment, Victoria replied. I've certainly had enough practice at it myself. The man mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over. Your father knows where you are now. He has resources beyond what you can imagine. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts. As the three riders turned to leave, the leader called back over his shoulder, his words a final, parting threat. Mr. Briggs, you might want to consider whether protecting a liar and a thief is worth the trouble that's about to come knocking on your door. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving Victoria and me alone in the gathering dusk. She stood perfectly still, staring at the spot where the necklace had vanished. For the first time since her arrival, she looked genuinely vulnerable, the fight gone out of her. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I've brought you nothing but trouble, and you don't even know who I really am. I turned to face the woman who had been Iris Quaid for exactly one afternoon, and Victoria Petton for the rest of her life. In the fading light, her beauty seemed less overwhelming and more human, marked by exhaustion and the weight of a decision that had cost her everything. I reckon I know enough, I said quietly. You're a woman who threw away a fortune rather than be forced into a marriage you didn't want. That tells me more about your character than any name ever could. She looked up at me then, and I saw tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. You don't understand. My father won't give up. Neither will the Hartfords. They'll come back. They'll come back with more men, with legal papers, with whatever it takes. They'll destroy you for helping me. Let them try, I said, and the words carried the quiet confidence of a man who had survived droughts, floods, and every other hardship this frontier could throw at him. I've been fighting this land for respect every day since I got here. Fighting a few rich men won't be much different. Why? The question was barely a breath. Why would you risk everything for someone who lied to you? I considered the question, my eyes moving to the spot where she had hurled away her inheritance. Maybe because I've spent enough time alone out here to recognize courage when I see it. And maybe because I know what it's like to feel trapped by other people's expectations. The truth was more complicated than that, but I wasn't ready to examine the way my chest had tightened when she'd asked for my protection, or how natural it had felt to step between her and danger. She had arrived as a stranger, built on lies, but somehow in the space of a few hours, she had become something more, something worth fighting for. What were you trapped by? She asked, genuine curiosity replacing the fear in her voice. People thinking I'd never amount to anything because I wasn't born to it, I replied, the old bitterness surfacing for a moment. This ranch was scrubland nobody else wanted. Took me 8 years to make it profitable, and most folks still look at me and see a failure. Victoria moved closer, so close I could smell the faint scent of lavender that clung to her travel-worn dress. I don't see a failure, she said softly. I see a man who built something with his own hands. A man who wasn't afraid to stand up to 3 armed men to protect a stranger. The space between us seemed to shrink, and I found myself acutely aware of the way the evening light caught the auburn highlights in her hair. She reached out and touched my arm. Her fingers were warm, even through the thick fabric of my shirt. If I stay, she said, her voice barely audible, everything becomes complicated. They'll come back, and when they do, they'll bring trouble that could destroy everything you've built. She looked away toward the dark horizon. And if I go, I'll spend the rest of my life as Charles Hartford's wife, bearing his children and pretending to be grateful for the privilege. Her hand tightened on my arm. I'll become everything I swore I would never be. I covered her hand with my own, surprised by how perfectly it fit against my rough palm. Then don't go. It's not that simple. Maybe it is, I said, turning to face her fully, seeing past the perfect features to the iron strength that had carried her 1,000 miles from everything she'd ever known. Maybe sometimes the simple choice is the right one, even when it's not the easy one. But even as I spoke the words, I could see the doubt in her eyes, the weight of a lifetime spent learning that her choices belonged to other people. The night closed in around us, cold and quiet, But I knew it was just a lull in the storm. The men would be back, and they'd bring hell with them. That night, sleep was a stranger. Long after Victoria had retired to the back room, I sat on the porch, my rifle across my lap, watching the shadows. Around midnight, I saw it, a flicker of movement near the corral. Not a coyote, something bigger. I moved silently, keeping to the darkness, circling around the barn. I came up behind him as he was trying to jimmy the lock on the tack room. I pressed the cold barrel of my rifle into his back. Looking for something? He froze. It was one of Thornton's men, the younger one who'd looked uneasy during the confrontation. Easy there, Briggs, he whispered, his hands going up slow. I'm not here for a fight. You've got a funny way of showing it, I growled, prodding him toward the open barn. Talk. Fast. Inside, with only a sliver of moonlight cutting through the gloom, he told me a story that made my blood run cold. Thornton doesn't work for her father, he said, his voice low and urgent. Not really, the old man wants her back for the family name, sure. But Thornton's real employer is Charles Hartford, the fiancé. That changed everything. This wasn't about family honor. This was about something else. Hartford doesn't give a damn about Victoria, the man continued. He just wants the necklace. He's got gambling debts that would sink a ship. That necklace was his ticket out. When she threw it away, you didn't just defy Thornton, you ruined Hartford. A new, more dangerous picture began to form. So what's the new plan? They're not just coming back with more men, he said, and I could hear the fear in his own voice. They're coming back with the law. Thornton sent a rider hours ago. They're meeting up with a territorial marshal. They've cooked up a new charge. Something that will stick, something that will get her arrested, no questions asked. Something that will get you thrown in a federal prison for helping her. He leaned in closer. Look, I'm just a hired gun. This has gotten too rich for my blood. Hartford's a snake. He'll have you killed just to tie up loose ends. But if that necklace is still out there, maybe you and I could come to an arrangement. I tell you where they're camped, you find it, we split it. You get your ranch clear, and I get out from under Hartford's thumb. The offer hung in the dusty air, a deal with a devil to escape a bigger one. I looked at the man, a weasel caught in a trap of his own making, and I knew I couldn't trust him any farther than I could throw him. Get off my land, I said, my voice flat, and tell Thornton I'll be waiting. He scurried away into the darkness, leaving me with a terrible new certainty. They weren't just coming back. They were coming back with the full power of the law, twisted to serve their own greed. And this time, courage and a rifle might not be enough. The next morning brought a cold wind and the distant, unmistakable sound of approaching riders. Victoria was already dressed and waiting on the porch when I came out of the barn. She'd slept as little as I had. How many? She asked, her eyes fixed on the ridge. More than yesterday, I replied grimly. Looks like 6, maybe 7. And they're flying a territorial marshal's flag. Her face went pale, but her voice was steady. They've made it official then. My father, or Hartford, must have claimed I stole something valuable enough to involve federal authorities. She looked at me, her eyes dark with a terrible understanding. They'll have claimed I took other things, forged documents, whatever story serves their purpose. Men like them don't accept defeat. The riders crested the ridge in formation, their movements disciplined and purposeful. At their head rode a man with a weathered face and a marshal's badge pinned to his coat. Flanking him was the silver-haired Thornton, his face a mask of smug triumph. Behind them came 5 more men, all armed and ready for a fight. Miss Victoria Peaton, the marshal called out as they approached the house, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of theft and fraud. You need to come with me. I stepped forward. Marshal, I'd like to see that warrant, and I'd like to know what jurisdiction you claim over a woman who's committed no crime in this territory. The marshal dismounted and approached, the legal document in his hand. The warrant is valid in all territories, issued by a federal judge in St. Louis. Miss Peaton stands accused of stealing property valued at over $10,000. What property? Victoria demanded, stepping out from behind me. The necklace was my mother's, left to me in her will. It was mine to do with as I pleased. Thornton smiled coldly. Not just the necklace, my dear. The bearer bonds you took from your father's safe. The ones worth considerably more than some family jewelry. Victoria's face showed genuine, absolute confusion. Bonds? I took no bonds. I've never even seen the inside of my father's safe. Nevertheless, the marshal continued, his eyes hard, the evidence suggests otherwise. Mr. Peaton has provided documentation. The bonds were in his possession until the night you disappeared. Their absence was discovered the very next morning. The trap snapped shut. It was perfect. Her flight, the timing, the supposed discovery of the theft, all woven together into a story that was impossible to disprove. It was her word against her powerful father's, a battle she could never win. Convenient timing, I observed, my voice tight with anger. Mr. Briggs, the marshal warned, his hand resting on his sidearm. Interfering with a federal arrest is a serious crime. For the last time, I suggest you step aside. It looked hopeless. The law was on their side, bought and paid for. We were out of options, out of time. They had us. But then Victoria moved. She reached into her traveling dress, not with fear, but with a calm, deliberate purpose, and she pulled out a folded piece of paper. Marshal, she said, her voice clear and strong, before you arrest me, perhaps you should see this. She handed him the document, a letter I had never seen before. It's a letter from my father, she explained, her gaze never leaving the marshal's face. Written 3 months ago, officially disowning me for refusing to marry Charles Hartford. In it, he specifically states that I will inherit nothing from the family estate and, as of that date, have no legal claim to any Peaton property. The marshal's weathered face grew troubled as he examined the letter. He held it up to the light, studying the paper, the aged ink, the embossed seal at the bottom. This appears to be genuine. It is genuine, Victoria said firmly, which means I had no access to any family property to steal. The bonds my father claims I took were in a safe I legally could not open, in a house I was legally barred from. I had no access and no opportunity. For the first time since his arrival, uncertainty flickered across Thornton's face. Marshal, you don't understand the complexities of this situation, he blustered. The girl is manipulative. She probably forged that letter herself. The paper is 3 months old, the marshal replied, his voice turning cold. The ink has aged naturally. The seal is authentic. Unless you're suggesting Miss Peaton planned this exact scenario, down to forging a legal document and letting it age for months, you have no case. I watched, stunned, as I finally understood the full scope of Victoria's intelligence. She hadn't just run away. She had prepared for the inevitable pursuit with the thoroughness of a general planning a war. She knew exactly how ruthless her opponents could be, and she had come armed not just with courage, but with proof. Marshal, Victoria said quietly, pressing her final devastating advantage, there's something else. The night before I left, I overheard my father and Mr. Hartford discussing this very plan. They agreed that if I ever fled, they would claim I had stolen the bonds. They needed a federal crime to force my return, and theft provided the perfect justification. That's a serious accusation, Miss Peaton, the marshal said, his eyes now narrowed with suspicion, aimed squarely at Thornton. It's also the truth. Victoria's voice grew stronger with each word. They assumed I would be too frightened to defend myself, too dependent on their protection to risk exposing their deception. They underestimated my resolve to live my own life, even if that life comes with poverty and uncertainty. Thornton made one last desperate attempt. Marshal, even if the theft charges are questionable, she has still violated her legal obligation to fulfill her marriage contract. Marriage contracts are not enforceable by federal law, Mr. Thornton, the marshal snapped, his patience gone. And pursuing false criminal charges to circumvent that fact is, in itself, a federal crime. Conspiracy to commit fraud. The confrontation was unraveling faster than Thornton could control. His hired men were shifting uncomfortably, realizing they'd been made party to a serious crime. The law was no longer their weapon, it was their judge. I stepped forward, my hand finding Victoria's, with a natural ease. Marshal, if there are no valid charges against Miss Peaton, I'd appreciate it if you'd ask these men to leave my property." The marshal nodded curtly. "Mr. Thornton, you and your associates will depart immediately, and I suggest you inform Mr. Peaton and Mr. Hartford that any further attempts to pursue this will result in their own federal prosecution." As the riders prepared to leave, their triumphant arrival now a humiliating retreat, Thornton shot a final, hateful glare at Victoria. "This isn't over. Your father has resources you can't imagine. Then he'll have to use those resources to accept reality," Victoria replied with quiet dignity. "I am no longer his daughter to command, nor his property to dispose of." The marshal and his escort departed, leaving only dust and a profound silence in their wake. Victoria stood perfectly still for a long moment, as if she couldn't quite believe that her long, desperate gamble had finally paid off. She had won. "How long?" I asked, genuine awe in my voice. "How long have you been planning this?" She turned to me, a small, weary smile on her face. "Since the day I turned 18 and realized my father intended to trade me like livestock. I spent 2 years gathering evidence, saving money, preparing for the day I would finally have the courage to leave." I looked at her, no longer seeing the mysterious mail-order bride or the high society runaway, but the remarkable woman who had orchestrated her own liberation with patience, intelligence, and a will of iron. "So," I asked, my heart pounding in my chest, "what happens now?" Victoria looked around the simple ranch that had become her sanctuary. Then she looked back at me, the man who had risked everything to stand by her. A real smile, bright and beautiful, lit up her face. "Now," she said, "I discover whether Victoria Peaton can learn to be happy as Mrs. Victoria Briggs, if that offer is still available." My answer was to pull her into my arms, finally allowing myself to believe that some gambles, the ones you take for the right reasons, are always worth taking, no matter how impossible the odds. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the valley, a low, promising sound. The rain was finally coming to my drought-stricken land. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where courage and destiny collide in the untamed frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means everything to us.